Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to our webinar, 4 Ways to Supercharge AWS with Cloud Management. Today's webinar covers why the AWS and RightScale Cloud Management combination is the best solution possible for AWS users. But before we get started, we would like to ask you a few quick questions. So we're going to go ahead and launch our first poll to the audience. Regarding the cloud adoption cycle, where are you in your cloud usage? So choose the one that's the best fit for you. Maybe you're just getting started with cloud, or perhaps you have a little bit of usage and you're starting to go mainstream, or perhaps you have a larger deployment and you've got broad usage throughout your organization. You're working on your processes, or maybe you're just pros, you're experts, and you're here to learn more. I'll leave this open for a few more seconds. We'll go ahead and push out the results to the audience. So, okay, there's an interesting divide here. So about 15% of you guys are experts, but the remainder of the audience looks like you're at kind of an earlier evolution of cloud adoption. So cool, good to know. Thank you. Next question. Are you an AWS user? You know, you might not be. You might be considering AWS. And if you are, however, how many applications are you running on AWS? Choose one here. So maybe you're just trying out with a small portion of your business. Maybe you're running a significant portion of your business on AWS, or maybe you're even running your entire business on AWS. Or perhaps you're not an AWS user, or you're just learning about AWS and just considering it. Leave this open for a few more seconds. So it looks like about 1/3 of the audience is not using AWS. Maybe you're just starting to learn about AWS, or you'll start getting on AWS soon. About another third is just starting out and just trying it out with a small portion of the business, and the rest of you look like you have a little bit more experience. So interesting split. We've got 1 or 2 more questions for you, and then we'll move on. Third question. If you are an AWS user, which of the following AWS services do you use? So with this one, you can select all that apply. So the first option, DynamoDB, Elasticache, or RDS, so those are all of Amazon's database offerings. So if you're using that, then you can choose that one. Maybe you're using the AWS Marketplace, or you're using CloudFormation or Elastic Beanstalk. Then if you're not using any of these, then it'll be over in a second. This is really helpful for us. Thanks, you guys. Okay, good results. Final question. How do you currently manage your cloud deployments on AWS? So again, this is for the AWS users out there. Choose the one that applies. Maybe you're just using the AWS console, or you're just using the AWS API. Perhaps you're using a combination of the two. Or perhaps you're using a third-party cloud management solution like RightScale or something else. It's okay. It's open for a few more seconds. Okay, so it looks like no one's using just the AWS API, but we have a good split here of people who are using the console solo or the console plus the API, and then a third of you are using third-party cloud management, so RightScale or one of the other providers out there. Cool, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate this. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. I've got, excuse me, Hassan Kajeh Hosseini. He's the product lead for PlanForCloud, which is a free cloud cost forecasting service offered by RightScale. I also have Siobhan Dindal. He's a senior product manager at RightScale. Siobhan's in charge of making sure that RightScale and Amazon integration is exactly what our customers need out of cloud management. So he's a really great resource to have with us today. And then finally, I have Ryan Geyer. He's a cloud solutions engineer, also RightScale. Ryan works with customers in the pre-sales stage to help them evaluate their workloads, decide where to put them, and to figure out which cloud is the best fit. So he also has a lot of experience working with AWS. So one of the many great things about GoToWebinar is a questions section. So check it out in the main GoToWebinar control panel. Greg Goodwin and Ryan Baird are standing by to answer your questions as they come in. Plus, throughout the course of this webinar, Hassan, Siobhan, and Ryan will address some of the more broadly applicable questions live on the air. So make sure to ask your questions early and often. We'll also have a live Q&A kind of dedicated session at the end. The hashtag for this webinar, you'll notice, is RightScale. So join the webinar conversation on Twitter. And with that, I'll hand it off to Siobhan.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Let's get started. So just a little bit about RightScale before we really dig into the weeds here. RightScale's been doing this, and by this I mean cloud management on AWS for several years. We're around 6 years old, and so we bring a lot of wealth of knowledge and expertise into this process. Some of the biggest customers, this is just a sample of AWS customers that are powered by RightScale. You'll see the logos here. But more important than just the logos, I think it's important to understand what are these folks trying to do. You know, early on when we talked with a lot of companies looking at cloud, there were some really interesting leading edge cloud use cases, particularly around scalable web, gaming, and whatnot. And then, you know, and you'll see somebody like EA or Zynga really embrace that type of use case. Going forward, you know, the paradigm of cloud really enabled entire companies to adopt new IT infrastructure in cloud. So entire companies would run their operations on cloud. And now as we're starting to get into more of a maturity phase, not only within cloud management, but also within cloud computing, we're working with a lot more larger organizations who are looking at, you know, optimizing central IT, looking at, you know, self-service IT. How can I make that procurement cycle smaller? Also, what sort of applications really work well for cloud? So as some of you may already be exploring within cloud computing, you know, are the dev and test scenarios working out really well? Let me try some of this. Big data is really big on cloud these days, and so we're seeing a lot of that happen through RightScale as well. And the gamut of these use cases really apply to a number of the customers shown on this screen, as well as other customers of RightScale on Amazon. So the agenda we have for you today is really just a progression of how we've seen a lot of these customers adopt AWS and how things move forward. So the 4 ways to supercharge AWS, we'll start out with Hassan talking about cloud cost forecasting, and then he'll turn it over to myself for visibility and control and being able to really see what's happening in your AWS environments. And from there, we'll turn it over to Ryan to talk about, you know, best practices around how you can organize your AWS environment to ultimately get to the point where you can manage the entire life cycle of your IT infrastructure from cradle to grave in AWS with RightScale. So let's get started. For now, I'm going to turn it over to Hassan to start talking here. So let me just give him keyboard and mouse. And Hassan, I think you should be ready to go.
Great, thanks everyone. Hi everyone. Okay, let's jump straight in. So why cloud cost forecasting matters? Well, we all know that cost is one of the important factors around cloud adoption, but there's still currently a lot of confusion around the cost of the cloud. So why do we need cloud cost forecasting? And when I say that, I mean it both in terms of prior to cloud adoption and also after cloud adoption. Well, first is to kind of better understand the elements which build up in your cloud spend. So are the majority of my costs going to servers running? Are they going to storage, data in and out from the cloud? Understanding this will help us kind of optimize our deployments to save on costs. Next is that there's many different purchase options available from different cloud providers. So for example, Amazon offer 1 and 3 year reserved instances, and they come in 3 different levels, so low, medium, and high utilization. So what would your cost look like if you used any of these purchase options rather than just simply paying for on-demand? And then finally, your deployments and usage of the cloud will grow over time. And if we can have a detailed look at the costs for this growth and budget for it, we reduce that kind of bill shock factor that we hear so many enterprises talk to us about. However, there's a lot of complexities and difficulties when trying to predict and forecast cloud costs. So growing infrastructure requirements, for example, we might not know accurately what our growth will look like. Then it's the cloud provider's pricing structures who has got more and more complicated, and it's got to a point where we have to look past just the hourly cost, which is stated on the provider's websites. And to make it a little harder, There's different rates for different regions and even being charged at different currencies. All this combined creates quite a big problem, and it's hard to keep up with the rate at which cloud providers are changing their prices. So essentially what we need is a simulation engine with the latest cloud provider prices, which enables us to build different scenarios. And that is why we built PlanForCloud. It's a free cloud cost forecasting website. And in 3 easy steps, you can create detailed cost reports. So step 1 is to define your requirements. And that is what servers you need, how much storage, if any databases, and also data transfers between any components within and also outside of a deployment. At this step, you can also define kind of your deployment, how your deployments will grow over time, using something we call growth patterns. Then we take this deployment and run it through a simulation engine and combine it with the latest cloud provider prices to create a detailed 3-year cost report. You can then clone these deployments, attach different growth patterns, or use different purchase options, and do that kind of what-if scenarios. We currently list, in PlanForCloud, we currently list AWS prices, excuse me, Rackspace, Windows Azure, Google Compute Engine. We also list software as well. So the best thing about all this is that you do not need any cloud accounts or any cloud credentials because we run a simulation engine. And it's also free and open to everyone as well. So with that, I want to give a quick run through of PlanForCloud. If we can load up there we go. Great, so this is the PlanForCloud website. It's at www.planforcloud.com. So you can sign up to PlanForCloud on this page, but you don't even need to do that. So we have this feature of login as a guest. So let's just go ahead and jump in as a guest and start using the tool. There we go. So this is our dashboard, and it shows a list of all of our deployments. You can easily create one by entering the name and just hitting on the create deployment button. And by default, we create an example 3-tiered web app deployment for you. So let's open that up and have a look through there. And this page is essentially where we design our deployment. A deployment is made up kind of servers, storage, databases, and data transfers. And so on here, I'm gonna just add, we see we've got 3 servers listed. I'm just gonna add a server to this. So I just click this button here. So let's say I'm looking for AWS in Europe, and I want to run a Linux server. I want to see all on-demand costs. And let's say I want a micro. So I can just type in micro here and the list is automatically filtered. So you can use this filter to see what kind of options you've got available for the applications that you're trying to run. And then if we select that, we can give it a name. Let's call this base. How many of these we need and how long these will be running for, so our usage. And we click add server. And that's it, that's our server added. We can do the same for storage, for database, and for data transfers as well. So if I go to the database tab, I just want to show you quickly the concept of this growth pattern. So in our database, in our main database, we've said that we need 300 gigabytes of data. And with this button, we've defined at every month, we need another 10 gigabytes added to this storage. So if I go to this tab here, we've got 2 different types of patterns. We've got something called permanent patterns and temporary patterns. So a permanent pattern is a pattern that changes your baseline. So for example, I know my business is growing and I know that I'm going to get about 5 or 10 gigabytes of more data coming in, which I need to store. So it keeps adding and going up. Next is this idea of a temporary pattern. And we see that a lot for enterprise, for e-commerce websites, in which we say, okay, over Christmas, my servers are going to get hit twice as they would normally, and then that's going to go back down to normal levels. So how much does that peak actually cost me? So you can design both of these patterns in PlanForCloud. and if we go back to PlanForCloud, at any point during the design, we can click the See 3-year cost report. At this point, we take the deployment and run it through that simulation engine to create a detailed cost forecast.
So Hassan, while the report is loading, we have a question from the audience. How relevant is 3-year forecasting when prices keep changing every few months for somebody like Amazon or other public clouds?
It's a very good question. So we have people, well, Amazon has changed their prices about 19 times since they launched. But we kind of produce these 3-year cost reports is because that time frame is more or less what companies use to decide what strategy to adopt. But you're right in which you say it constantly keeps updating. And the best thing about PlanForCloud is that once you've signed up, if a cost changes for a cloud provider, we actually rerun all your simulations for you, and then you can come back and see how much that has affected you. So I hope I've answered that question. Here we've got the 3-year cost report of what's being produced. There we go. So at the top we can see that this is our monthly spend, and we can see we have 3 peaks at there we go. And these are to do with reserved instances. So in this deployment, we're using 1-year reserved instances. So this is when we need to pay that upfront fee. You can also see there's a slight growth, and that's due to a permanent pattern we've added to this deployment. And also these peaks here, in which we say over the winter months, so Christmas shopping season, we need more servers to handle our hits we get into the site. Down here, we can see a total cost breakdown. So this kind of gives us a good insight to how we can start to optimize. So for example, 52% of our costs are going to our servers. Well, do I really need my servers running 24 hours a day? If not, we can reduce that and see what happens. And finally, our cost breakdown as a table format. You can export this into CSV and create any kind of other analysis you need on top of it. So the best thing about this now is that if I go down here and if I clone this deployment, I will make an identical copy of this deployment. And now I can say, okay, if I change this base server from an on-demand to a reserved instance, what would happen? Or if I change the quantity of this from 1, I actually need 2. I save it. I rerun the report. We can actually see what impact that has had towards our costs. That was a micro, so it didn't make too much of a difference. But that's kind of the scenario building and the different growth patterns we can apply and see how they will reflect our costs. And that's it. It's as simple as that. If you've got any questions, feedback, or any kind of feature requests, I would love to chat further. So please get in touch. Siobhan, I'll hand it back to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Hassan. All right, so let's keep going. The next thing we wanted to talk about in the agenda was just visibility and control. The power of cloud management is that it gives you a single pane of glass and insight into your cloud deployments on Amazon. When we think about approach to cloud, and having looked back at several of our customer engagements over the past several years, we see 2 types of patterns. One is the plan for the future as step 1, and then from there, once you have an understanding of really where you want to head and how you want to leverage cloud as part of your broader IT strategy, you enable your organization to use what they need today and iterate on that in time, over time, measuring, learning, and understanding what's working, what isn't, and then modify your future plan accordingly to reflect what works and what does not. That's one of the avenues that we've seen in the past. The other avenue is, really more of a, on-demand, leveraging the best of agility on cloud. Your organization using and already using what they need today, whether it's with or without the blessing of central IT or a broader governance and compliance organization. And then from there, sort of being left in a situation where that the broader organization needs to figure out what's going on. And then from there, with that understanding, plan for the future accordingly. What we've seen in, when we look at the vast majority of our customer engagements over the past 6 years, is that one of these is ideal and one of them represents more of reality. And ultimately what that translates to is a bunch of expense reports with Amazon.com charges on there. And a quote we have listed here is that, people really can't be buying that many books. And so the approach that RightScale has and what cloud management can really offer you is, well, there's a way to figure out what's going on when people are already using cloud and you're in a situation where you need to come back and evaluate and understand what's going on. There are really two things that jump out when customers come to us with this problem. One is around security, and the concern here is really, hey, look, I've got a compliance organization, or even if I'm a small company, I still have an understanding of what are best practices around security. I've done this stuff for many years before in different environments, but now I need to answer the questions of, okay, where am I exposed? How are things configured? Do they meet my own internal compliance standards? And how can I sort of figure all this stuff out? And then on the second point here around visibility is, okay, well, cloud is not something I can tangibly touch. It's not under my desk. It's not someplace, a co-location facility I can drive to and ask somebody to point out the racks in my account. So what I really need to understand is, how do I break down that expense charge that I see from Amazon Web Services to a very much more granular level? How does it break down across my different departments and the use cases each of those departments has? What are those things being used for? And how can I ensure that the resources being used are actually being leveraged appropriately by the business? For example, is there, are there a set of resources that have just been left running in the cloud that I'm paying for that nobody's really using? So let's jump in really quickly into the RightScale dashboard and give you a sense of what types of things RightScale can help you with. So here we are in the RightScale dashboard. I happen to be looking at one of the accounts in RightScale that has active cloud credentials for Amazon. And we can very quickly come into the report section of RightScale and take a look at two different things. One is the infrastructure audit. When I go into the infrastructure audit, again, this is addressing that first point around security and really trying to understand what's going on. Here, I can perform a new audit around security groups, which is a way that Amazon enables configuring your network access policies. What I'm going to do here is create a new audit, which will report on all the ports to which access is allowed. It is the most comprehensive report around security and access that RightScale provides. And right now, having clicked through that, I have created my report. And this is the output of that report. I have the ability to download the output and process it however I may, independent of the tool itself. And here I can see the entire selection of ports that are open and where, in which cloud these ports are open, and even how that policy is grouped into the security group. I can click on these security groups and see a wealth of information rolled up in the security group. For example, if I looked at default here on US East 1, I would see the rules that have been configured, the permissions that have been configured for this specific security group. And so when I come back to the report, I can see, again, a single pane of glass that represents my security exposure across all of the Amazon regions. Now, this is a fairly complicated problem to solve. Typically, you'll see, visibility into one Amazon region at a time. Here, we're providing the ability in a single pane of glass to go across regions and really get a broad understanding of what's happening in your account. So that would address, for example, security groups. We have similar audit reports around SSH keys as well. You may have seen that other tab. I'm not going to go ahead and run the report here, but you can see a way for you now to be able to monitor who has access to these machines and where those SSH keys live. On another side of the reporting capability that a tool like RightScale can provide, we have the ability to provide a breakdown of how your costs are structured so that you can really understand where the money is going when you're paying that monthly bill. Here we have periodically run usage estimate reports. And I'm just going to click on the most recent one. Here you will see, again, in a single pane of glass, multiple clouds being rolled up into this report. I can see the specific service that is being utilized in each of these clouds. And I see specific information about the cost associated with that service. But most importantly, over the time period that I've run this report, I can see how much usage I have and what the cost of that service is to my organization. There's also an associated cost, if you're leveraging RightScale that we can represent here. However, for the most part, the important thing to realize is this is a way for me to be able to distill down what is happening in my account in order for me to gain a little bit more visibility, a little bit more control. So if we go back to the slides, it's really just a call to action, really. If we look at all of these things and answer the questions around where am I exposed and how does all of this cost break down, I can start to take advantage of the cloud management capabilities with specific interest in governance and compliance controls. RightScale has a variety of features here, identity and access management in particular, where you'd be able to control who can set your security policies. We have the ability to enable, say, that compliance officer or that system administrator who has previous experience with best practices network configurations, allow that individual or those individuals to create the policies and allow everybody else to simply use them without being able to modify them or change them in any way, shape, or form. From there, hold on one second, I seem to be getting a question.
And so there's a question about exactly how the SSH key audit actually works. So maybe talking a little bit about how managed login works and how we're able to track that.
Absolutely. So SSH keys are typically handed out to individuals, and so you'd be able to see, and if we have time at the end, I can maybe run the report, but you can see based on an individual's SSH key which servers they have access to, where those keys live, and from there you'd be able to understand, hey, wait a second, does this individual really need access to my production servers? He may be in a role where a developer doesn't need access to production, he needs more access to sort of the development test environments, and his SSH key shouldn't have been applied to that production server, and so on and so forth. So there's really, the point of this exercise is to expose information and then again bring it back and be able to take action. So from here now you can again, and this is a great tie-in to what I was just about to mention, so policy management, you'd be able to audit everything that's going on, but then you'd be able to actually take action again with the identity and access management controls provided by a cloud management solution. You can leverage features such as managed SSH, where somebody like RightScale can control who has access to which servers in your accounts and what they're capable of doing on those machines. For example, does somebody who has access to your Amazon account really need to be able to log into every single server? In the case of SSH keys, you'll see who can access them, but can you control and revoke that capability? If somebody who has previous access to Amazon leaves your organization, does their SSH key remain on those servers, or can a system, a cloud management solution, pull that SSH key off when you remove them from your account? Things like that are really the take action, call to action pieces that cloud management can provide. The last point I want to make here is around visibility. Once you have an insight into how your spend is applied throughout your account, you can start to apply rules around how that cost management should break down. You can apply quotas through a cloud management solution based on a department, based on a user, and so on and so forth, as well as have projections to understand how your usage is being applied and will apply going forward. So from here, I want to turn things over to Ryan. He's got a few things he wants to talk about.
Great, thank you, Siobhan. And I apologize for butting in there earlier without introducing myself. This is Ryan, so that was the voice that jumped in there earlier. So we're going to talk a little bit about sort of how RightScale gives you tools for organizing your deployments and organizing your applications that are running on AWS. So we'll jump right into some of the bullet points here. One of the keys to this is the concept of deployments. So in the RightScale dashboard, you can actually assemble all of the servers that are required for a particular application into what we call a deployment. Conceptually, it's not unlike what you're probably used to doing if you're used to setting up applications in data centers. You tag each of the servers as belonging to a certain application and so forth. What this does, though, is because it's in a UI tool and you're able to see those application servers and database servers and all those things that are required for your application in a single UI view, it makes it really easy for folks across your organization to really see what an entire application consists of. Much the same way as PlanForCloud shows you the cost breakdown, you can actually see what the actual result of all those servers are. You can see that there's the 2 database servers and load balancers and so forth. And in a couple more slides here, we'll actually show you a quick peek of that in the RightScale dashboard. Again, as I mentioned, it gives you a single view for all of those assets and all of those things that are in a single deployment. And that can be across regions, across Amazon regions, across obviously the availability zones within regions. And it really gives you that view of absolutely all of the components, including things like elastic load balancers and even RDS if you're using those today. It also allows you to assign human-readable names to these deployments. And in fact, RightScale even gives you the ability to tag those deployments with some additional metadata so you can search through them and have tools for finding those particular deployments. You can organize them by application, by the stage of maturity of whether it's staging or production or so forth, or even break it down for individual development teams or particular departments. And then again, once you've been able to kind of put all of your application servers and all of your assets together in a single deployment, it makes it really easy to repeat that configuration. So if you do have a production environment and you need to create a staging environment that's exactly like your production environment, you can actually easily clone the entire environment. We'll show you that quickly in the demo as well. So let's actually jump right into that, and we'll show you what a deployment looks like in the RightScale dashboard. This, again, is the same account actually that Siobhan showed you earlier, but this is one of the different tabs here that shows all of the deployments that are actually configured in this particular RightScale account. You can see there's quite a few different applications that are running here, but the one that we wanted to highlight is this one that's a sharded application. It's actually 2 different shards of the same application running in 2 different Amazon regions. So you can see that highlighted here. We have the first shard listed at the top here, shard number 1, and there's a master and slave database configuration, redundant load balancers, and redundant application servers, and these are all running in US Oregon, AWS US Oregon. You can see that they're also distributed across different availability zones, and you can see that all here in a single pane of glass. Of course, this application, as I mentioned, has 2 shards, 2 kind of different discrete geographic locations. So we've got shard 2, which is the exact same set of servers and the exact same roles, a master and slave database, redundant load balancers, and redundant application servers, this time in US East, so serving the east and west coasts of the US here. Again, also distributed across different availability zones. So you see that whole configuration in a single pane of glass. All of the configuration data about what application you're going to deploy to this is stored in the deployment. So you can specify a get URL or a subversion URL or even a zip file that gets downloaded that contains the application code that you're going to run here. There's a variety of other configuration options that you can pass into this as well. And I mentioned too that you can now that you've defined all of this, very easily clone this entire environment. So the entire configuration, database servers, application servers, and load balancers in both regions with all their configuration settings can be cloned, and you can end up with a new environment that's exactly like this. Now, this is really useful for a number of different reasons. You can create a new environment for something like staging or QA, or for some testing of a unique feature that you're about to roll out to your application. This can also be very useful for disaster recovery reasons. You can actually have these set up to be in different availability zones than the ones that you normally run your production servers in, or even different Amazon regions. What you'll notice is that all these are not running at this point. This is just the definition, the server template, which we'll talk a little bit about in the next section here, but also all of that configuration metadata that goes into it. So you can very easily start these up, but you're not paying for them unless you need them for disaster recovery purposes. So let's go ahead and go back to the slide deck here, and we'll talk a bit about lifecycle management. I touched on it a bit with disaster recovery there, but we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail. So we're going to talk sort of about the cradle to grave lifecycle of an application. And these are sort of the bullet points here of some of the things that we actually provide pre-packaged, and we'll show you that in the RightScale dashboard as well here in a moment. We have what we call the MultiCloud Marketplace, and that contains these server templates, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail, that are pre-packaged solutions for technology stacks. So we've got a wide variety of open source technologies, HA Proxy, those are the load balancer server templates, Apache, which we use for those load balancer server templates, as well as many of our application servers. We have MySQL and coming very soon Postgres in our next release. Application server technologies such as Ruby, PHP, and Python on the open source side. And then, of course, popular complete three-tier stacks. So the load balancer I've mentioned a couple of times now. The application side, we've mentioned the open source options, but that also includes Java, IIS.NET, and that's actually it, aside from the open source ones I've already mentioned. And those interact with the load balancers that I've mentioned before, as well as database technologies such as MySQL, Postgres, and Microsoft SQL. Those are all technologies and three-tier stacks that we maintain and build in the RightScale engineering group. So those are regression tested and things that you can trust with your production application. In addition to that, we also have independent software vendors that are partnered with us that provide commercial solutions for many of these things as well. So on the load balancing side, we're partnered with Riverbed, and they have the Stingray technology for not only load balancing, but optimizing and traffic shaping and other things of that nature. For the database side, for relational databases and SQL databases, we partner with a couple of different folks that provide commercial solutions there. And then we also have Couchbase as a NoSQL option, again, with commercial support from them as well. In addition to that, not just whole servers, whole server templates, we actually have a library of scripts as well, which I'll highlight briefly in the demo of the MultiCloud Marketplace, where you can import just a single script to do things like installing application monitoring agents. Some of the ISV partners that are doing this are AppDynamics and New Relic, where you can install the application monitoring agent for those particular providers, and they'll be able to show you the performance of your application and so forth. So we'll switch back to the browser once more here, and I'll show you some of those things very quickly here. This is what the MultiCloud Marketplace looks like in the RightScale dashboard. And as I mentioned, there are the server templates, which are sort of those complete pre-baked solutions, not only from RightScale and from our SV partners, but even open source developers can put things in here as well. And then RightScripts. So I mentioned Riverbed, for instance. If I search for that and I could spell it properly. Riverbed. Then that'll come up and you'll see the Stingray technology there. So these are essentially virtual appliances that you can import and run. And then on the right script side, we'll highlight AppDynamics here. These are a list of scripts that most of our server templates are composed of, actually. So in fact, AppDynamics is right here up at the top because they've published recently. So AppDynamics agent download, you can actually import this single script and execute it against your application server and install, in this case, a Tomcat monitoring agent for Java. So that's what that looks like. So in terms of lifecycle management, what we've sort of covered is that first part, right? You need to define what your technologies are going to be, and you need to, source those from somewhere. As you can see with the MultiCloud Marketplace, we make it very easy for you to find those technologies and simply import them and use them off the shelf. Once you've chosen which technologies you're going to use, you set those up and you launch those into a deployment, which gives you all of the ability to define what metadata is going into that, right? So what application code you're going to use, what the fully qualified domain name is going to be, what the backup policy looks like, that sort of thing. And those are all actually automated by RightScale, which we'll talk about a little bit in further slides here. It's also the second bullet point here. Again, you also have the ability to clone and copy and update and make changes to that environment very easily because you're working in an environment where it's very easy to do change control. You are very specific about which server templates and what scripts are associated with the servers that are running in your deployment. So you can define what operational tasks are to be performed on any particular component in there. And we'll talk about that as well. And then lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when. So how does RightScale bring a lot of power and a lot of additional functionality to just the Amazon cloud the way that you're using it today in these particular examples? And we'll talk about that a little bit. So I know I've mentioned it a few times, and hopefully this will answer some of your questions about exactly what a server template is. So a server template is the full definition of what a server role is going to be in a deployment. So what we actually maintain is a base set of operating system images across all of the Amazon regions. So we maintain this for Ubuntu, CentOS, and Red Hat. And other operating systems can be supported as well, but those are the ones that we create and maintain and regression test in our engineering group. And starting from that, that's the base component of a server template, is just a base operating system with our agent on it. On top of that, we add configuration management. So you can use either write scripts, which are essentially any binary executable that the underlying operating system understands. So that means Bash, Perl, Python, Ruby, Java, PHP, whatever scripting language you want to use to make configuration changes to the underlying system. You can add those as scripts to a server template. We also have a really tight integration with Chef, so we can use the Chef DSL for doing those configuration changes as well. So server template consists of that base operating system, a list of scripts, and we'll talk a little bit about how those scripts get used here on the next slide. And then additionally, some monitoring and alerting configuration, which we'll also talk about as we go for a little bit forward. So the purpose of a server template, is that it's very reproducible. Once you've defined this thing that uses a specific image and a specific set of scripts that configure it to a particular state, doesn't matter if you launch this today and then a week from today or even a year from today, you're going to get exactly the same configuration. So this is very important in scenarios where you have a dynamically scalable deployment where you're adding and removing servers from it, because you want to make sure that the configuration is consistent across all the servers that you're running. It's dynamic. So as I mentioned, we configure these servers from scripts at boot time. So what that means is it's very easy to change what that script does, if you need to make a simple change to, say, an application server that runs Apache and you need to install a new version of Apache, rather than launching an AMI, making a change to the package that's installed and rebundling that AMI and using that as your new go forward image, your golden image, you can actually just change the configuration script that installs Apache that's part of a server template and install, instead of installing the previous version of Apache, you install the new one. So it's very, very easy to change those things. And then of course it's also multi-cloud. So in terms of Amazon only, what that means is that these are going to be configured in exactly the same way across all of the regions of Amazon. The way that Amazon works, there's a division between each of the regions. They're their own API endpoint. Assets that exist in one don't exist in the others, and they're very discrete in that way. So we actually, again, maintain assets across all of those regions, and this single server template represents that exact same configuration regardless of the Amazon region or even non-Amazon cloud that you launch it into. We'll talk a little bit more about what those scripts are and sort of the order in which they run. So this is actually a screenshot of one of the server template definitions, and this is just a very simple one. It's the base server template that we often base many of our server templates off of. Chose this because it fits on a slide a lot better than some of the more complex ones, but it shows the 3 different types of scripts that we have. The first is the boot scripts. And as we've mentioned a couple of times, this is used to configure each server to its role. So in the case of something like a PHP application server, this would include scripts that would download the latest version of your application code or the version that you specify with an input. It would include scripts that automatically discover and register that new application server with load balancers and with database servers. Which is that second bullet point under the run list, that you can discover peers in the same deployment or dependent servers in the same deployment and actually act upon them. That's a lot of the automation capability that RightScale adds to the deployments into individual servers. And then under the operational scripts, these are really things that you can perform on the server over time. So once you've got this thing up and running, there are things that you're likely going to want to do to that server operationally. And you consider these, you can consider these like level 1 support automation, right? So maybe you see a situation where you need to redeploy your application code. Okay, so you can redeploy your application code through operational scripts. You can add or remove your application server from load balancer and so forth. We also offer decommission scripts, and those are there to allow you to, the same way that you're automatically adding a server to a deployment, you can now automate the removal of that server from a deployment, remove it from a load balance pool, remove the database networking rules that you've set up as well. So I've alluded to this a couple of times also with monitoring and automation, but we use a open source agent called collectd to pull back information about the performance of a server, and it's totally configurable. So you can pull back specific things about your application. What we do then is we take that monitoring data and we can add alerts to that. So you can have, again, some automated remediation of things. If you know that your Java-based application server has a JVM that consumes a lot of memory, and the best solution to that is to restart the JVM. You can monitor that and then set up automation, which is part of the server template, to automatically restart the JVM for you. We also use this mechanism for doing auto scaling. So something common that you might look at is the number of Apache requests per second. When it reaches a certain threshold, you know that you're going to need to add more capacity to your deployment. In addition to that, we also automate things like database backup, and then also offer as operational scripts on database servers the ability to do automatic failover from a slave to a master, or execute those remediation scripts as well. And then also cold deploys and patches, which we'll touch on a little bit here as we go through the what happens when scenarios. So in the interest of time and not poking the demo gods, I've actually got a set of screenshots that kind of show what this process looks like. But I assure you that in putting together these slides, I actually went through these processes. So what happens when an availability zone goes down? We'll talk through that in a real quick fashion here. So this is a deployment where you can see that the US East 1D availability zone became unavailable. These two servers which were running in our deployment are now no longer running, they're inactive. So in order to remediate this, we can actually just very quickly select those two servers, choose a bulk action to relaunch those servers, and then of course you'll be prompted if you really actually want to do that. And by clicking OK here, it's actually going to resubmit the request to launch those. They'll be automatically configured by the server template, and you should be back up and running. Now, if it was a hard outage where you couldn't relaunch into the same availability zone, you could actually go in and make a quick configuration change to those two servers to have them launch into a different availability zone and then go through the same process. So all that automation takes care of that for you. Now, the next scenario is what happens if you have some sort of security issue and you need to hot patch your application or even individual servers in your deployment in your infrastructure. So we're going to cover the hot patching your application scenario here. So what you would do is, again, on the deployment screen here, we list all the servers and inputs, but we also allow you to run scripts across all of the servers in a particular deployment. So you would choose the scripts tab, and you would choose the app do update code recipe in this case. That's actually going to pull the latest version of your application code. You would then choose all of the servers that you want that apply to. So in our previous example of our sharded application, we've got 2 application servers in each one of the regions in each shard. We're going to select all of them because we want to roll that out to all of them. And then you go ahead and click Run on Selected there. And that's going to execute that operational script to roll out the latest version of your application code to all of those servers. So that's the demonstration of those two. We kind of went through that fairly quickly, but now that you've seen the power of organizing and then doing the lifecycle management of your infrastructure with RightScale, you may want to know what to do next. And for that, I'll turn you over to Siobhan again.
Great, thanks, Ryan. It's really helpful to paint some pictures of live scenarios that, you know, a lot of our customers use, but a lot of people have to deal with in cloud just in general. So thank you for that. In terms of what's next, you know, we tried to explain the path that a lot of our customers have gone down, where, you know, they've been in situations where cloud has already been adopted, and they're backing into a scenario of having to understand, and really from that understanding build out a plan for the future. So what we would advise now in terms of next steps is really try and understand what the future looks like for you on cloud. And you know, with that, we do have a tool for PlanForCloud. Feel free to simulate your cost structure with PlanForCloud. It's just planforcloud.com. From there, you know, when you, as many of you are looking at cloud and still very early in your cloud adoption cycle, we've seen good success with greenfield opportunities or expanding existing opportunities into cloud. And you know, the tools that RightScale provides can be very valuable to you. We do have a free trial that you can take advantage of if you would like to leverage some of the things that Ryan was talking about, creating a deployment, using the server template, and being able to leverage the tools that come part and parcel with that RightScale capability set around cloud management. From there, you know, as your needs grow and you start to adopt more and more of cloud, we do have a wealth of experience and expertise in this area. The cloud solution engineers are available and are ready and willing to help. So from there, you can contact RightScale. There's some information in the top right-hand corner of the screen, an email address, as well as our website with the phone number if you have additional questions. At this time, I think we have maybe a few more minutes, so I do want to get to some of the questions that have been asked. So this one's for Hassan. Hassan, can you talk a little bit more about PlanForCloud and explain, you know, how PlanForCloud addresses on-premises deployments, as well as you know, some of the tools around breaking out deployments within a PlanForCloud report?
Sure, yeah. So on-premise currently it is something we're looking at, and it's depending on where you are and things like that, the cost differs quite a bit. But we see a lot of people doing that kind of comparison, public versus private, or a hybrid of solutions. So that's in the pipeline. So if you guys watch out on our Twitter, it's at PlanForCloud, or our blog.planforcloud.com. We will release those kind of features and let you know about them.
Great. Another question here. Do you provide some tools to be able to bill users and groups usage based on the access management structure and the real usage? That's a great question. What we see with a lot of our larger organizations who are managing many RightScale accounts through, on one or maybe more cloud environments or cloud providers, excuse me. We do provide some tools primarily to be able to facilitate that chargeback. A lot of these larger organizations have processes in place to do chargeback, and what they really are looking for is the data to plug into those ITSM processes or whatever the workflow is that they have on their side. So that's currently what we're providing, and we expect that capability to advance as not only we mature, but our customers' needs mature. Let's go to Ryan real quick. So on the configuration management that you talked about, is there a way for the actual configuration and the management of that configuration to tie into ITIL processes in bigger organizations where they have libraries of these IT configuration management for standardization or compliance purposes?
So you can certainly integrate with those sorts of things. Really what you end up having to do is actually putting the configuration management code into RightScale. The reason that we do that is that we actually cache all of that code. And the sort of the intent there is to reduce external dependencies. So when we're launching a new server, we want to make sure that if we're able to launch it through the RightScale core system and then get the right link, which is the agent that actually communicates with our backend, up and running, that it isn't then trying to call some external system to try and get the configuration management code and be able to run that. So we actually cache that in our systems. Now, what you can do to really handle your change management and so forth and getting that code into RightScale is we do offer all of those things and expose all those things through our API. So you can have a continuous development and continuous integration system where you qualify that code, make sure that it meets standards and policies, and then upload it to RightScale. As it pertains to interacting with things where you have policies for launching servers and so forth, the API is also the answer to that. You can put that workflow ahead of actually launching things in RightScale and then use the RightScale API for that.
Great. Last question I have here is, if I manage multiple different AWS accounts, can I use one RightScale console for all the accounts, or should I have one per account? So there's a couple things as part of this question that I wanted to clarify. The RightScale console is kind of that single pane of glass where you see all of your cloud environments. What we didn't show you is the ability within that console to control more than one RightScale account without really changing a lot of process, without changing a lot of clicks or a disruptive user experience. We encourage one Amazon account per RightScale account. Primarily because what we've learned from our customers is that they want to separate how they receive invoices from Amazon based on their usage of individual individual Amazon accounts. So if one business unit has one Amazon account, they would like to see that within one RightScale account. That helps from a compliance perspective on who has access to what. It also helps on the cost side of things, where you can attribute the cost of the AWS account to that business unit or whatnot. So today, if you're managing multiple different AWS accounts through the RightScale console, single pane of glass, you would have an equivalent number of RightScale accounts for your Amazon accounts. And those are the questions that I have for you. I'm not sure if we have any more, but with that, I do want to thank everybody for their time. Additional questions can be sent to sales@rightscale.com. A few of you have indicated that you'd like some follow-up, and we will be following up with you. And with that, thank you once again, and hope you guys have found this informative.